Okay, welcome everyone. I think everyone's just about taking their seat. So, hello, I hope you can hear me in the real world and the virtual too. My name is Liz. My pronouns are she and her, and I am Director of Programs at Stonewall. We are gathered here this afternoon to have a really wonderful conversation about something that is truly very close to my heart, which is a panel focusing on approaching diversity, equality, and inclusion discussions at work authentically as LGBTQ plus people, navigating this through harm, without harm, and with considering our mental health first and foremost. So I just mentioned that I'm Director of Programs at Stonewall. For those of you that don't know Stonewall, we are Europe's biggest LGBTQ plus human rights organisation. My work encompasses our work with businesses, workplaces, sport, communities, and it's a real pleasure to work for Stonewall. So that's me. You will see that I'm joined by a wonderful panel who I will get to introduce themselves. Jazza, if we start with you, could you please introduce yourself to the room?
Yes. Hello. My name is Jazza. It's my real life birth given name. It was Dad's fault. I can't be blamed or given any of the credit. I use he, him pronouns, and my day job is I work at YouTube as a strategic partner manager, working mainly with gaming creators across the UK and Ireland. So the whole Fortnite thing, that's completely my fault. I'm so sorry. But then also as a quote unquote 20% of my role, I'm the new head of the Pride ERG for EMEA at YouTube as well. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jazza. A beautiful name that is. Anyway, it's wonderful. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
Lucerne, you are also with us too. Could you please introduce yourself, your name, what you do in the world, and your pronouns as well, if you feel comfortable? Oh.
I'm just going to say this is why we should have used Google Hangouts for this.
Oh no, I guess we'll have to come back to you. I'm so sorry. And we have another wonderful panelist, Helen, as well. Helen, I don't know if you can hear me or see me at this point. I'm not sure. I think we might have. Okay, I think we might have some tech issues. But anyway, we will, Luzanne, we'll come to you once you've sorted out your tech. Oh,
here it goes. Okay.
Amazing. Hello. Could you please introduce yourself to the room?
Sure. I'm after being on Zoom for so long now, it's like I know I can figure this out. What's going on in a second? I have to be my own IT person when you're remote, 100%. Hi there. My name is Luzerne McAllister. I am the head of diversity, equity, inclusion, and culture at Point Click Care, which is it's a 20-year-old company. So I'm sure many of you have not heard of it before, but it's kind of the foremost software as a service company in the healthcare tech space around long-term and post-acute care. So you think about what we call, especially in the US, the silver tsunami, all those baby boomers who are now turning 70s and 80s. My company is kind of the best position to help the US economy with that market. So that's what Point Click Care is. I have been in diversity, equity, inclusion formally for, I don't know, 7 years or so now. And prior to that was always doing something in the DEI space. And previous to this, I was at PepsiCo, appointed the Chief Diversity Officer there for a number of years. So that's my background. I'm also on the board of Ramba, so it's kind of like the sister group to EUROUT. So really excited to be here. We're kind of representing Ramba, and a graduate of the IEP program at London Business School, as well as a full-time MBA grad of NYU Stern, where I lead the LGBT alumni group now. So really excited to be here with all of you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Wow, two incredible individuals I'm joined with today, so I feel very, very lucky to be in your presence. We'll kick off into this conversation because it's a really good one to have, and it's an important one to have. Jazza, I'll come to you first. In terms of, you know, your role working in the digital creative space, often having to work remotely, I'm assuming even before the pandemic. Also,
surprise, this is not the Google office.
How important do you feel it is to talk about mental health in the workplace?
I mean, like, I feel like the obvious answer is hugely. I think that there really was kind of like a watershed moment. The pandemic really brought all of that to the fore, because mental health less became a thing that some people sometimes had problems with and dealt with, and especially in British culture, I think it's something that we traditionally are very bad at talking about. Two, during multiple lockdowns, it became something that everybody all of a sudden had a first-hand experience with and understood. Everybody could understand what it was like to have to struggle mentally with kind of like the world. And I feel like that collective experience that everybody had made conversations around mental health much more accessible to many people who maybe before the pandemic wouldn't have necessarily thought about it, and it wasn't necessarily at the forefront of HR departments at the front of their minds, for example. And so if we can have a silver lining of anything of the pandemic, I think that's a good thing that's come out of it, and it's been taken very seriously as well. So that's why I would say it's at the forefront. And I think that we're lucky. It's often downplayed that maybe it's like fashionable to talk about mental health nowadays. I'm okay with riding that wave of fashion, to be completely honest. If it makes it easier for us to kind of like access those resources, and companies are going to take it more seriously, 100% we should make it as fashionable as possible, and make sure that we have those resources so that from a professional standpoint, we can give as much as we can to the work that we have, because that's at the end of the day what our bosses and managers want from us, right? And we're able to do that better as mentally and physically healthy individuals.
Thank you so much. Yeah. It's funny, the idea of it being fashionable or being the thing that people want to talk about is funny, because I think growing up, I definitely felt a stigma around talking about mental health, and language around mental health so negative. Helen, lovely to see you. We were able to get you into our virtual stage. If you'd like to introduce yourself, your name, with your pronouns, and what you do in the world for our audience, that would be fantastic.
Sure, thank you. Great to see you all. Sorry it took me a while to get in, but here I am. I'm Helen Jones, my parents are she and her, and I'm the chief executive of EUROUT, which is the LGBTQ mental health service. We're based in Brighton in the UK, but we are a national project as well, and have a couple of national services that we offer. And our primary thing is to deliver accessible, affordable LGBTQ mental health services run by and for LGBTQ people who have lived experience. So we're a unique organisation in that respect. We've been around over 20 years now, so the picture about mental health and LGBTQ mental health particularly has changed a lot in the last 20 years. And I think that's some of what Jazza was saying just
Oh no. Oh,
Well,
no.
she was just saying that she agreed with me, so.
Yeah. For those of you that didn't catch that, Helen is the CEO of MindOut, which is a fantastic organisation. Helen, I think you dropped off there a little bit on the end. MindOut do fantastic work around the mental health space, centred around LGBT inclusive mental health care. I know we've come to MindOut before at Stonewall for support, so we very much love the work that you do. I will come to Luzerne. You joined us at the point, Helen, where we were talking about why it's important to talk about mental health in a work context. So Luzerne, for you, kind of with your experiences in your senior roles, there's often pressure to be a senior leader and have great mental health all the time. How do you manage that?
So it's a new role for me. This is my first time being at the head of something new. One, it is the first time that I'm actually, being at the head. Two, it is I'm building something new. So the DEI as a function here, they did have a previous head of DEI at this company, but was there very briefly and only really had time to work in a reactionary way with everything that was going on in 2020. So this is me getting a chance to really establish a full service DEI function. I will say that for me, it's actually it's very nice to finally be the head, because before what was happening is that in my prior role, I was the global LGBT agenda lead for PepsiCo. I was the US Black agenda lead for PepsiCo and the US Latina lead for PepsiCo. And anything that I would take in, external research, internal research, stories, anything that I was hearing about, all the marginalization that was happening to these communities, I was just one step further away from the top in sharing those stories and getting things moving. I mean, it really took, what happened with Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd for kind of a huge company to kind of wake up in a global way and really kind of, make changes. I would say compared to a lot of companies, PepsiCo have been doing a lot already, but to really get to the point of that we need in terms of investment, and really for people, I think for the first time, frankly, I think those who were in the dominant culture felt trauma in a way that people who normally are marginalized do. And it was their very first time doing that. And I was literally on calls with, white men and women at the company who were telling me about what they saw. And I'm sitting there as a Black man watching them cry, right? And there's something weird about that, right? Because at the end of the day, for me, it's like, yes, am I hardened by it? Am I not moved by what happened? No, of course not. I am very much moved, and it affects me. I think I would say probably more than them, because my proximity to it is a lot closer, and I live that more on a daily basis, on a weekly and monthly basis. And so I have, in a weird and ugly sense, kind of grown used to that and have had practice dealing with that level of trauma. Whereas for them, even though they are still have a distance from, being that subject, they for the first time really kind of felt the visceral human trauma that came with it and the feeling of helplessness that they had never felt before, to say, I don't even know what I can do in this situation. And so I think, it's really been a matter of translating the thoughts and feelings of people who are marginalized and those who are in the dominant culture, and kind of pushing them closer and closer together to kind of build that empathy so that we can be more trauma informed and kind of lead each other in that way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Luzerne. Yeah, it's definitely a moment of reckoning and recognizing as well. And I think that having that point of suddenly the tables almost turning and being like, oh wow, you understand what some of the feelings that we have felt for a long time are, is really a moment to sit with. So thank you so much. Jazzy, you kind of mentioned earlier about this, it being kind of a moment where we're like, it's like in vogue to talk about mental health. But as we think about how the conversations around well-being, mental health, how it's changed over the past few years, what do you think has driven that change? Why do you think it's gone in this direction?
Oh, that is a good question. I think it really has been kind of like the work of third sector organizations and the amount of work that they have done over decades and decades. I mean, like Stonewall and Mind Out and other charities that really have been banging this drum and these drums for such a long time. I remember when this started becoming a thing that you would read in like the papers in the UK, which you'd have never, when I was growing up in kind of like the noughties, you'd have never heard kind of like advocates from kind of like prominent backgrounds talking about their mental health struggles in the way that we have with sports people and other kind of like prominent people in business, being able to talk with such frankness without being judged. And I think it has been that gradual drip, and everything that happened last year really did kind of like, that was the tipping point. That was the everything coming to a head, and then that was kind of like, we had like a lot of the foundations for how to talk about mental health in kind of like a really constructive way. All of that groundwork had already been laid by a lot of charities and people working in this particular space.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's funny, the range of people that talk about mental health. So we've got it from, you know, Premier League footballers to the royal family to celebrities to
Literally,
you
for
know.
some reason, the only person I could think of was Prince Harry, and I'm so aware that there are more people who have talked about it.
But yeah, there are, right? And it's become a conversation that just would not have been had 10, 15, 20 years ago at all, which I think is important and impressive. Would you say, I was gonna come to you anyway, Lizanne. Yeah, do you feel that as well?
Yeah, I think social media is really where it took off, right? Like, I think what happened is, and what social media does is it takes things that we've been holding as secret or behaviors that we've been attached to shame. And as soon as we start to see somebody bravely put it out there that, oh, I actually do this for myself, then it's like, oh, you do it? Okay, then it's okay for me to do it too. And next thing you know, self-care became a hashtag, and everyone is talking about self-care. And everyone's talking about taking time out for themselves, drinking water, stretching, doing yoga, all these different ways of being self-care, right? And you know, it felt like every single second you were seeing that hashtag, right? Even before the pandemic hit, you started to really see like different versions of what that meant for some people. And also this kind of, it's okay to do X, Y, and Z. It's okay to take time off. It's okay to take vacation. Don't feel the pressure to, you know, do X, Y, and Z. Take care of yourself. You know, the whole airplane, you know, analogy with putting the oxygen mask on yourself first. Like, all of that really took off. And I think then with the pandemic, it just even further, and it got to the point where, especially in marginalized communities, where where it is not, you know, they don't have the resources much to talk about things like mental health, and there's also stigma around it. It really was even able to push through those corners of the world, right, with social media and get people talking. So I think social media was a big one because it allowed for kind of everyone to have this discussion at the same time, online in their own way.
And you were able to find those people really easy. Like, I work at YouTube, so I am going to give a YouTube example. The amount of creators who ended up speaking very candidly about their own mental health journeys, when they would go on medication for the first time, the fears that they would have, the things that they found out. They provide a space for people to not feel like that they are alone when they are experiencing something, regardless as to what that is, whether that's something alongside mental health or whether it's stuff like identity. Feeling like there is somebody who has also gone through this or who is going through this as well, it's such a powerful part of making sure that you don't feel alone. And people have cottoned onto that. And now you have like management in companies being able to share quite candidly, like, I mean, sometimes a little bit performatively, this is my morning routine and I do yoga for 3 hours from 5 a.m. And I'm like, okay, cool. I want to hear about the person who smokes a cigarette and has a couple of cups of coffee before they start their day, because that's some of my self-care as well. Somewhat destructive self-care, but it's still self-care in a certain way. but making sure that people understand that others have gone through it. And I think before, people could feel so alone when they were going through those kinds of struggles. And Luzerne like hit the nail on the head, talking about it being the gift of social media, one of the gifts of social media that we got.
Yeah, thank you both so much. Helen, I can see that you're back with us, and I hope you're able to hear this question, because I think it's an important one. So we've talked about the experiences of mental health and feeling able to talk about it in a much more open way and in a much more accepted way, and without the same level of stigma that used to exist. How does that change when we think about the various intersecting identities that sit within us as people? So being part of the LGBT community and the intersections within that, being people of colour, having a disability. Why is it important to consider intersectionality when we're having these conversations?
Yes, I am back with you. Can you hear me? Could somebody give me a thumbs up if you can actually hear me?
We can, yeah, it's much better than it was.
Great. Okay, well, yes, I caught some of the previous conversation about the change in the conversation about mental health and the reduction of discrimination and stigma, which is excellent, and it has changed hugely. But I still think that even within our communities, there's a lot of prejudice and discrimination around mental health issues still to address. I think for quite a lot of LGBTQ communities, there's a bit of a narrative of wellness, that we need to present ourselves as positive, contributing citizens, to kind of give the lie to the kind of prejudicial assumptions that there might be about us. And that is really compounded when we start to talk about anybody with intersectional identities. There's loads of research now that shows that for Black people, for older people, for younger people, for people with disabilities who are also LGBTQ, their mental health experiences will be much worse than the rest of the population and the rest of the LGBTQ community. Bi people as well. The stats and the research that show bi people's mental health is
I think we just lost Helen a bit there, but we've actually
Cliffhanger there on what bi people's mental health is going to be.
So it's interesting that Helen mentioned that, because I was talking about this earlier today, that we talk about statistics around the LGBT community, and there started to be an understanding that for trans members of the community that those statistics are usually a little harsher, but we often forget about bi people, in that bi people and bi men especially also record very high levels of anxiety, depression, of not feeling able to come out, of feeling judged by society. And so the LGB part of the acronym is kind of we can't look at this group LGBT as a homogenous group. Each of the different groups have different experiences. We lost you a little bit at the end, Helen, but I was just saying how for bi people the statistics are sometimes hidden by LGBT, and actually bi people and bi men that we found often have much more severe statistics than we would expect. I don't know if you're back with us. I will throw the question on intersectionality. I'll come to you, Luzerne. You've kind of spoken so beautifully already about the experiences of more marginalized people. Why is it important to consider intersectionality when we are launching these conversations?
Yeah, because intersectionality is, and actually I think this was talked about a little bit in the previous session, but I always say it's not addition, it's multiplication. There's a compounding effect that it happens to a person when you talk about intersectionality. And intersectionality, let me be just very specific. And when I talk about intersectionality, it's not just how someone identifies themselves, it is the identification of those areas of their lives in which they are specifically marginalized in the environment in which they exist. And so when you talk about, two marginalized positions on top of each other, not only are you separately experiencing the marginalization, but you're within the community, or within one community, you're marginalized, and then within that other community, you're also further marginalized. And what that does is it creates pressure to perform even harder. And it actually creates, I think she said it before, right? Your brain is scanning at all times, so it creates a level of exhaustion. It also just compounds on the amount of ways that you face what I call headwinds or emotional taps. And so it allows you, but the gift is that you also get to see the world a little bit differently from, I think, other people. There's a price that comes with it. You experience a greater level of trauma because of it, but you also have a level of empathy, usually, that's greater if you're able to kind of put that entire narrative together and understand, that how different people move through the world and how they're positioned really impacts how they live their life and how
Yeah.
Oh, did I freeze?
You did freeze.
Okay,
No, sorry.
no worries. Where did I stop? I know it wasn't that much.
It really affects how people live their life.
Right. So okay, that was you freezing just now, right? Okay, good. I was like, did it happen?
That was just me recreating what happened. So, and then take it from there.
Yeah, so it really affects how being, when you are further and further from that position of power, it really does impact, even when you're not thinking about it, because when you live it every day, what that can do to you is you just see unfairness, right? You just feel trauma. And if you're not conscious about it, right? And if you're not actually taking time to heal from it and kind of do that self-care and also kind of forgive yourself in that situation, it can really have a compounding effect on your mental health. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that people in general are aware of the intersectionality, aware of how it impacts people, and that people then from that lens can kind of empathize with people because they're trauma informed.
Yeah, exactly. I'm really conscious of time, and I want to kind of get to a place of thinking about how we can encourage our organizations to do this, how we can hold organizations to account, how organizations can hold these conversations. So yeah, I'll come to you, Jazza. When organizations are hosting these kind of conversations in a workspace, what should our organizations keep in mind? What have you seen done really well, and what is less well, shall we say?
I'm conscious that we have an audience of future business leaders here. So I am going to tell you, future business leaders, as you come to decide what your DEI programs are going to look like. Seminars are great, but please do not just stop at seminars or like listening sessions. I think that was kind of like a very quick fix to a lot of the things that were happening, especially last year. People thought that, oh my goodness, we have to have a mental health seminar. And that is one very specific way of being able to empower your employees to be able to feel like they have the psychological safety to be able to address their mental health and bring that to work, and maybe some of the struggles that they have to work, and take time off, change their workload, be able to be frank with their management to be able to do that. But you need to make sure that they are not only being given the tick box of, we invited Luzerne to come and speak at our event. We invited Liz to come and speak on a panel. It's so important that you back that up with actual resources that are available to them and actual action as well. It's all very well having a HR policy that says that you're going to be able to give mental health leave to your employees. How many people actually end up taking that? And ensuring that you actually track that data as well and see if this is something that is being used by the users, by your employees. I think that there is so often a as kind of like people from the communities that we represent within the organizations where we work, we obviously want to be involved in DEI kind of like initiatives that we have that are relevant to the communities that we are from, but we also have to be super aware, and leadership have to be super aware that it is so much more of a burden to take on the responsibility of, for example, running everything to do with LGBTQ+ folks in your org. Or doing the same for kind of like the Black network or the disabled network, because you as well as an individual, you are also oppressed by these systems, and you are going to have the burdens of maybe other intersectional identities as well. And I think often it's very often you will see the one queer person at work running all of the Pride Month events and education seminars and stuff like that. And that is an unfair burden of labour that they are having to take on in order to, not to use provocative language, but in order to educate a load of straight people. And that should not be how the burden of labour falls. And that's where allyship is incredibly important, working across different employee resource groups and ensuring that it isn't just kind of like your one Black or brown employee that's doing kind of like the DEI initiatives, or the one woman on your floor that's doing something for Women's Month, right? Like this should be a group effort of people with multiple different identities, creating a network of allies.
Thank you.
My rant is over. Sorry about
no,
that.
I love that, and important to hold. Helen, if you could hear us as well, my question's the same for you, which is that from an organizational basis, or an organizational view, what can organizations do really well to support the mental health of their employees in the workplace?
Well, I think, as Daz has said, it needs to be more than lip service to good mental health, and it's got to be backed up with proper interventions. And I think training, is really important. Training for managers. I think offering mental health support to workers and managers to make that a reality is really important. It's got to come from leadership. It really has. And I think the more that leaders in organisations talk about their own mental health and demonstrate what they mean by good mental health care at work, I think that can do an awful lot. I was really struck a few years ago. We did some work with Lloyds Bank, and I don't know if you remember, but their fairly new chief exec took 6 weeks off sick leave with stress and was very open about taking this sick time for their mental health. And I thought that was such a good way to demonstrate positive mental health leadership. It was saying that everybody can suffer with mental health issues. Sometimes everybody needs a break, and knowing when we do is a really positive thing to publicise and be very open about. Something that we've started doing at Mind Out, which I think has been really helpful internally, is using wellness action plans. Now, these originated with National Mind. You can find them on the National Mind website. And it's a really useful template to talk to in line management about people's mental health. So it gets you to talk about what keeps you mentally healthy at work, what the challenges might be, how you respond to different triggers at work, what mental ill health at work might look like for you as a person, and what your managers and colleagues can do to support you if you start to feel mentally unwell at work. And it's a really, really good way to start that conversation in a one-to-one or in a group setting. I think some of those things are really useful.
So useful. Thank you so much, Helen. Wow, yeah, great advice, wonderful advice, and yeah, thank you for leading so much of this work in our sector as well. And so finally, Lizanne, the same question to you as we kind of look towards wrapping up our time together today. What have you seen that's been really good, and what, I guess maybe I'll alter the question slightly for yourself. What advice would you give for allies in this space that want to support people, that want to support LGBTQ plus people? How can they step up to the plate?
I think they need to, well, one, educate themselves, right? So making sure that before they look to have a conversation with somebody, that they have the language and the contextual understanding that they can get from their own research to show kind of that they're being genuine in their interest and curiosity, right? We don't want to put the burden on those who are already dealing with the trauma to have to explain their trauma to somebody else. That's not being an ally. So that's kind of the first thing that they can do. I would say the next thing is that once they kind of have that context and language, then being able to know how to have a conversation with that person, right? And just really not even have a conversation, but just having those listening sessions with that person to understand what it is that their personal experience is, and have multiple conversations or listening sessions, because not every person is going to reflect the entire community, right? And so really taking those, then you're able to take those individual experiences and understand them in the context of the learning that you've just done. And then I think the third thing is really to kind of understand where they play in that field. So, you know, after you've kind of gotten the research part of it done and the interpersonal part of it done, and you kind of gathered all this information, really just sitting back and self-reflecting and saying, how do I contribute to or harm or do harm or right knowingly or not in the past, or how do I, you know, make changes in the future, but where am I in all of this, and how am I contributing to the space? That's, I think, the third step. And then kind of the fourth step is, where do I go from here, right? The next steps is, you know, how do I act as an ally going forward, right? What does this mean for me? How does this inform the next steps that I take, all right? And that may mean making sure that you're reaching out within the company and organization to make sure that all of the baseline things are there. So making sure that the programs are there, making sure that that this is being talked about, right? That there's a mental health capability that exists at the organization. And then beyond there, from an organizational standpoint, making sure that people are able to now kind of access it. And I think going back to what both Jazza and Helen said, it's really about the accessibility. So, you know, you have to have the groundwork there, you have to have the capability, you need to have the managers who are trauma informed, right? They need to be able to take, because everyone's situation is different, everyone's mental health is different. And so it takes a savvy trauma informed manager to have a human-centered approach to their directs, right? Who sit down and have a one-on-one conversation to understand as much and ask, you know, as much as they can, you know, that person is comfortable with, right? And allowing for that person to give them that information so that they can create the best working experience for their people as possible. That's really important.
Just to add on to what Luzanne just said, it requires resources to be able to get your staff to a level where they are capable of being able to do that. That can be mental health first aid, that can be awareness training, but it's going to require overheads to get your staff to a level where they're going to be able to do that. Sometimes it's going to need you to bring in somebody external as well, because the burden of looking after your employees' mental health that's not necessarily in your employees' job description. It requires money, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. thank you so much, everyone. I believe we've already kind of run over time, but I wanted to see if there was ability to have any kind of questions that are coming from the audience, or I can't see any questions that have come into us or any kind of question function. But in case people are thinking of them as we're going, I will begin to wrap up. What a rich conversation. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your time. Helen, though our internet problems persisted, we were still able to hear your fantastic insight and your wealth of kind of knowledge and advice from being a leading light in this sector. Thank you so much. Jazza, incredible to hear from you and your experiences in the digital world and at YouTube, and I think, you know, taking some of the wins that we have come so far, and that this is a moment to be proud of, and that we can finally have these conversations. And so thank you so much. And Luzerne, similarly, thank you so much for sharing your very personal insights and experiences over the last year and further. And yeah, thank you all. It's been a real wonder to share this space with you today. So
And
I hope
Liz,
you have a wonderful rest of your day
as well. Thank you. Great host.
Thank you so much.
Jazza, Luzerne, Helen, we really appreciate it. If we can give them a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.